Here we go. This is Punch Needle for Beginners, and I am your instructor today, Megan. I work for Michaels. So this is what we're going to be doing today with these really fun mushroom patterns. Mushrooms are definitely still a trending item right now, along with strawberries. Have you seen strawberries everywhere lately? Strawberries are another one of those key icons that keep popping up all over the place. So today we're going to be doing some very beginner basics with Punch Needle. So if you have never tried punch needle before, but you are very curious about it, this is your class. This is your punch needle, and I'm going to show you all the tips and tricks for just starting out. We're not going to be using a kit today, so I've asked people who come to this class to buy some monk's cloth, buy yourself a punch needle, and of course, buy yourself some yarn. So the yarn that we're going to be using today is called Impeccable from Loops and Threads, comes in lots of beautiful colors, and it is the absolute perfect weight yarn to go through the punch needle and to make some of the projects we're going to be working on. So let's switch over to the other camera, and I'm going to show you what I'm working with over here. So I have several different examples of several different projects. This is the one we're going to focus on today, and we do have a PDF for you. So we're going to drop that into the chat, and that PDF has about 4 different potential designs just to kind of get you started. So we have a cute little coffee cup, we have a nice heart, and then we have the mushroom and the bear. And so this is what the mushroom looks like, and this is what the bear ends up looking like. And those are 4 different actual options for just, coming to this class. Thank you for coming. So you get these for free. And we have that PDF for you in the chat, so feel free to download it. When the video hits YouTube on Monday, you will also have access to that PDF. So if you don't get a chance to print it now, or if you don't get a chance to download it now, you will get a chance to do it once the video is up on YouTube. If you're not subscribing to our Michael's YouTube channel, make sure you do that so that you get alerts and notifications when new videos pop up and when this one pops up on Monday. So I want to talk to you first about monk's cloth because you cannot do punch needle without this fabric called monk's cloth. And monk's cloth looks very similar to something called Ada cloth. And Ada cloth is what you use when you're doing embroidery or when you're doing some needlework projects. So what I want to show you the difference between monk's cloth and Ada cloth is such a big dramatic difference. So this Ada cloth, you've probably seen it before. It's very stiff, it's very starchy. And if you took a punch needle, which looks like this, has a wooden part to it and it has a metal part to it with a little loop here at the end. If you stab your punch needle into your Ada cloth, you have officially ripped those fibers and you have made a hole in your cloth, and you cannot fix that hole, and the loops are not going to stick in that fabric. So the difference between Ada cloth and any kind of cotton fabric and this beautiful monk's cloth is, let me show. So on monk's cloth, if I take my punch needle and punch through the monk's cloth, what's nice about monk's cloth is that it's kind of self-healing. Do you see how I just kind of rubbed my finger underneath and that hole went away? So what's happening with the monk's cloth is the monk's cloth is kind of spreading out when the punch needle goes through, and then it's going to grab your yarn and it's going to hold your yarn on the back side. And when you pull your needle out, it's going to keep some yarn over here. So there's always going to be 2 sides to the work that you're doing. There's going to be a loop side and there's going to be a stitches side. So this side are the loops. So when I push my punch needle through, it's gathering yarn at the back and it's making these loops. And every time I push it up and down, it's making one of these loops. And on this side, it's making stitches. So as you might already be able to tell from what I'm holding on to right now, if you are doing any kind of punch needle project that has letters on it, you really need to work and make sure that you're doing the letters on the correct side. So you need to decide if you are going to use the stitches side, which is a lot more for intricate detail, or if you want to use the loop side. So for example, this letter G was done on the stitches side, so it's a little flatter. This side is backwards and this side has all the loops on it, but it's easier to read on the stitches side. So someone in chat just suggested burlap, and I think burlap is an excellent material also because just like monk's cloth, when you push through burlap, it's going to spread out and then come back together. It's not going to just rip through. So yes, something woven like this, monk's cloth or like burlap is a great idea. Now monk's cloth comes in different sizes too. And punch needles come in different sizes. So this is a kit that's available at Michael's, this cute little llama. And this is all using embroidery floss and a punch needle that is much thinner and much smaller than this one. We also have these really cute little kits. So maybe a narwhal or a bee, or I have another one that has like a little fox on it. So these are all done with embroidery floss also, which makes for even more intricate stitches. So you can use that. But we're going to be using, like I said, Impeccable yarn, which is loops and thread, and it is a medium size yarn. So I know that someone put in the chat earlier that they have never punched needle before, but they have done some crochet. And I love that. And what's great about punch needle is after you're done crocheting and you have all these beautiful colors, punch needle is a great scrap buster. It's a great way for you to use up all of that extra stash of yarn that you have so that you have another excuse to go buy more yarn. Because yarn collecting and yarn using are two different hobbies, as we might know. So here we go. You can also get some of these kits that come with all the colors of yarn. So if you don't want to purchase all the different colors that I suggested, I picked my pattern with my mushroom today that just uses 3 colors. So I have 3 of these impeccable pieces of yarn. And like I said, it's a scrap buster. It's a stash buster. So I've used these for lots of other projects before. But these are the 3 colors that I have that I'm going to use for the mushroom. I do have that PDF yarn order here. Someone said in chat, yes, please. Thank you for self-identifying. I am too. So we have these cute mushrooms. I'm going to take my scissors and I'm going to go ahead and cut that pattern out. I'm going to be using, I think it's a 6-inch hoop. It's either 6-inch or 8-inch. I made my designs on purpose to be able to fit perfectly inside of a 5-inch hoop in case that's the smallest size that you have. But feel free to use anything larger than a 5-inch hoop. And I'm going to use my piece of monk's cloth. I cut way more than enough. And I'm going to be using, like I said, I think a 6-inch hoop. So I'm going to take the 6-inch hoop. I prefer wood, but of course you can use whatever you want to. And I am going to push. Here's my bottom part of my wooden hoop. Put my monk's cloth over top of it. And then I'm going to take the top and press it down. And then of course we have that metal piece that goes at the top of your hoop. And you want to tighten that as much as you can. And you can pull it and stretch it so that this is as tight as you can have it. I agree. Someone in the chat said you never have the right green, so you have to buy 10 greens. And that is absolutely the truth too. I agree with you 100%. Now, the way that I do my transfers, there's lots of different ways to do it, but the way that I'm going to do my transfer is by taking the pattern and putting it underneath my fabric. Now, the lighting in here, you can't quite see because I have a white background underneath. So I'm going to use some extra light. So I'm putting some light underneath. And now you can definitely see that pattern. I'm going to take a Sharpie marker and I'm going to go ahead and trace that pattern onto my hoop. So if you don't have access to a light underneath, it also helps to hold it up to a window. So, and if I want to, I can tape this down if I feel like it's going to move around while I'm trying to hold it. So I can just use a little bit of tape to keep it in place and to have it just where I want it to be. And then I'm going to take a Sharpie and I'm going to trace the general pattern. So if you don't have a printer, another idea for transferring your pattern is to pull up this PDF on your computer screen And your computer screen can also act as a lamp. And if you put it on a bright setting, then you can illuminate it from underneath and you can trace over top. Obviously, just be careful if you're using a Sharpie or something to make sure that doesn't get onto your computer screen. But I think you should be safe because the monk's cloth is pretty thick and should be able to protect your screen. Another way that I have done before, because sometimes when you don't have the right resources, you become very scrappy and do some weird things. Another thing that I have been known to do before is to take my pattern and take sharp, ooh, goodness, take a sharp pencil or take a sharp marker and literally trace this line and kind of almost make a dotted path on this line, kind of cutting into it. And then I just go ahead back with a pencil or a felt tip pen or something like that. And I can sketch through dashes to give me enough of the design on the paper that I can kind of fill in the rest of the design. So that's another like hack that I sometimes do if I'm getting frustrated or don't feel like I can see the pattern well enough to be able to trace it. Or you can cut it all the way down with scissors and trace around it. And someone, Susan, said in the chat, a stamp. Yes, absolutely, 1000%. You can do a stamp. And if you're super advanced and super into crafting, you might have a Cricut machine. And it is possible to put this monk's cloth down on your Cricut mat and use one of your pens to draw a design from Cricut as well. So someone else is suggesting using chalk on the back and transferring it that way. Absolutely. All of those are great methods, but once you get the pattern onto the monk's cloth, you are ready for the first step of punch needle, which is threading your punch needle. Now your punch needle, this size that I have is a large size, and it comes in a couple of different sizes, but this is the one that works best with the Impeccable yarn. It also comes with this little plastic tube that has a nice wire for threading your needle. Now I tend to lose this, which is why I put a big blue flag on this, because I'm going to try so hard during this class as I'm putting everything all around to not lose this. If you do lose it, I have some backups because believe me, I've been there too, but it's hard. So I definitely put an extra piece of tape on this. It comes with a little white flag, but I put even bigger piece so that I don't lose it on my table while I'm working. So with your needle threader, you have the top that has the flag and you have a double set of wires. And you're going to stick the double set of wires through your punch needle down through the wood and out the bottom. So you might be able to see, there you go, out through the bottom, that double set of wires. And in order to thread the punch needle, you're going to put your yarn through those two wires and just kind of loop it through a little bit. You're going to pull that flag and you're going to pull the yarn through the punch needle. So the punch needle is hollow and the yarn comes all the way through it. And then there's one last step. You might be able to see that there's a hole right here. So the yarn that's coming out with the tail needs to go through that hole and towards the back. So you're going towards the back and it's coming out to be able to dangle down towards your table. So that is me threading a punch needle. I'm going to show it again with another color so that you can get a good look at it. And then we're going to keep moving. So when you have your punch needle, you're keeping it so that the opening of the metal part is up and this hole is down towards my table. I'm taking my yarn threader and I'm going to go ahead and put this through, and you can see that double wire coming out the end. I'm going to stick my yarn through the double wire. I'm going to pull on the flag and it's gone through the punch needle, but there's one last step to go through this hole. So I take this thread or take this yarn and go through that hole. And now my punch needle is officially threaded. So someone in the chat said they didn't have one of these punch needle threaders. Ooh, that would be rough to try and get that through. There are other ways, some of the other ways that I have been known to use before too. Something like a Chanel stem or a pipe cleaner can go all the way through, and because it's wire, you can kind of make a little loop and grab your yarn. But yeah, it might be time for a new punch needle because that's kind of a game changer. So there you go. Our punch needle is threaded and we're ready to go. Now I'm not going to punch through my project yet. I just want to show you a couple things before we officially start the project. So with your punch needle, the way that it works is you punch with the yarn through your monk's cloth. Now on the other side where your needle punched through, you're going to grab the yarn and you're going to leave a tail on one of the sides of your fabric. And then what's cool about punch needle is that I'm going to raise the needle up, and just above the fabric, I'm going to drag it a little bit further and I'm going to make what we call a stitch. I'm going to pull it up, drag it a little further, punch down, pull it up, drag it, punch down. And I'm trying to keep these stitches even. And what's happening on the front is I'm making the stitches. And what's happening on the back is I'm collecting loops. So see how those loops of yarn come away from my fabric? So I can collect a lot of loops and make a really fluffy side. And the fluffy side can be really fun. For example, I used the loop side on this little coaster and I made it fluffy on purpose and I used this side. But if you're trying to make something that has words on it, like I showed before, or this letter, you might want your finished side to be the stitches and not be the loops because it's harder to read because the loops are so fluffy. So there's a question also in the chat that says, do the kits come with punch needles? So the kits that are currently at Michael's, the little kit I showed you, and the big kits that have yarn don't come with the punch needle. So you do have to purchase that separately, but there are in the kids section some Creatology punch needle kits that do come with punch needles. So there are different opportunities for different kits. But yeah, so if you want your punch needle to come with it, you can use one of the kids versions and it's still a good punch needle and it works on lots of projects. And if you want to purchase your own punch needle, then you can use whatever other projects you want to use and keep using that same needle over and over again. So great question. Keep asking in the chat. So here are my stitches, and you can guide these stitches along. You can make these stitches larger, longer, but obviously the longer your stitches get, just like in sewing or something, the looser these are going to get. So I tend to do pretty tight and pretty close stitches. You might also notice that if I pull on this yarn, I can easily pull all of my stitches back out. So then that kind of begs the question, well, how do these all stay in there and how does this not just unravel? So the way that these all stay in there is that eventually they start getting tighter and tighter. And so the cloth itself doesn't have much other places to go. So it's going to hold those in tighter. And then at some point, if you're finishing your piece, you might have noticed on this one, it's a little crusty. So the reason why this is crusty is because I put a layer of Mod Podge on it. And then with the Mod Podge keeping these loops crusty, there's no way these stitches are going to come back out because they can't come back through the fabric since the Mod Podge is kind of grabbing it. So hopefully that makes sense to you. Or another way that I finish my projects is when I have something like this coaster. I might take a piece of cardboard or take a piece of felt and use hot glue to kind of take the monk's cloth, wrap the monk's cloth, and then hot glue this as a final finish. So by having all my stitches attached to hot glue, they're also not going to pull up because they're glued down to something else. So having that last bit of adhesive in some way, shape, or form is a good way of making that happen. So there's a couple other questions. It says, could you please show the first stitch once again? Absolutely, we'll be doing that for sure. And then another question's asking, I can't get my frame on correctly. Is the monk's cloth too thick? Great question. So this monk's cloth that I put on was a little bit thick for this hoop too, but you can usually take the hoop all the way. You can take that metal piece all the way out and stretch that circle as much as you need to make that happen. So feel free to take that metal piece all the way back out and then really kind of push it together and twist it in order to get it nice and tight. There are other frames you can use besides an embroidery hoop. So I have done This is one of those snap hoops where it's plastic, almost like PVC piping, and the plastic snaps on. These are really great at keeping this nice and tight. And this gives me a much bigger surface area. So if I wanted to make a punch needle pillow or something larger like that, I can use something other than a hoop. So another question asking in the chat is, can we use craft floss, not embroidery floss, and separate the threads? You can use embroidery floss, and lots of the kits do use embroidery floss like this one, but you're gonna need a thinner monk's cloth in order to use embroidery floss, and you're definitely going to use a thinner needle. This is called the large wooden punch needle, and it's sold on the racks in Michael's, right by all the embroidery and stitching elements, so feel free to grab that. All right, I'm going to start on our official project, but I am going to show all the threading. I'm going to show the first stitches. I'm going to show all of that stuff again. So Susan's asking, can you use linen cloth? And honestly, you can try it, but I kind of think the linen cloth would be like this canvas cloth. And if the weave of it is not meant to move, once you rip through with a punch needle, it's not going to self-heal. It's going to leave a hole and you're going to destroy your cloth. And then the fabric isn't going to kind of join around and grab that loop. And so your stitches, when you push them down, they're going to come right back up. Same thing with Aida cloth. Aida cloth is too stiff. So when you punch down through Aida cloth, it doesn't grab the loop. It doesn't hold the stitch. You'll just pull the yarn right back out and it doesn't do what a punch needle is meant to do. So the fabric is the most important part of punch needle. And if you don't have monk's cloth and you're struggling, then that's probably why you're struggling, is because you definitely need some type of monk's cloth or some kind of fabric woven in the same way. All right, I'm taking my needle threader. I'm putting it through the metal side of my punch needle. I see my little wires at the end. And with my mushroom pattern, I'm going to begin in the dots. So I'm going to begin in the details, and then I'm going to build out the red, and then I'm going to build out the yellow. So whenever I'm kind of looking at my pattern, when I did this letter G, I started with the orange, then I did the outline of red, and then I did the blue. So you're always kind of building out when you're working on this. It's not really a left to right kind of thing. It's kind of center outward. All right, I'm sticking my white yarn through my punch needle. And I'm going to pull on the flag and pull that yarn all the way through. Don't forget about the hole at the top, and you're going to stick the yarn through that hole going backwards. So now the yarn is hanging down towards the table. Yeah, the name of the fabric is monk's cloth. And Martina, if you can find that link again, that would be awesome. Thank you. So I'm going to be doing a couple of stitches in the white spaces. So I have my tail. I'm going to go to where I want my white space to be. I'm going to punch through the fabric. Now, because you have this tail, what you're going to need to do is you are going to need to go to the other side and see where that white is hanging off your needle. And you want to pull the tail so that the tail is on the bad side of your work. You're definitely going to work one color at a time. You can keep switching back to the same color as you go, but only one color at a time. Yeah. All right, so now I'm leaving this tail. I'm going to pull the needle up, and when you pull the needle up, keep the opening of the needle is kind of like facing what direction you want your stitch to go. Do not pull your yarn very far away from your fabric, because then that's going to make a loop on the side that shouldn't have loops. That's going to make stitches. So we want stitches, we want them tight. So just drag your needle along and then punch it back down, pull it up, punch it down, and follow the line or follow that curve of this white dot that we're trying to fill in. And you're going to do as many stitches as you feel like you need to or want to fill up this space. And whenever I'm filling up a space with stitches, I am kind of doing an outline and then continuing to go in. So there's a question that asks, is the wire pliable enough to go through that last hole too and do it all in one step? And the answer is yes, it is. Ah, yeah, try the cloth you have. And if you find that your stitches are not being caught, then you definitely have the wrong fabric. Aida cloth and monk's cloth look very, very similar. So it is possible that you have monk's cloth. Take it out and check it out a little bit. Try pushing your punch needle through it. And if your punch needle can go through it, then hopefully you do have your monk's cloth and not Aida cloth. All right, you can stitch over top of stitches, but when you are done filling up that space, you're going to go to the other side and you're going to pull away from the needle again. And I'm going to pull my needle out of my work. And I'm going to cut. And that frees up my needle. And then I have the tail where I started working. And I have this little fuzz bit that's coming up from where I stopped. And I was able to do this little circle and get some white in that little circle. So with these bits, because this is the loop side and they're pretty high, far away from the fabric, you trim these tails and extra pieces down, and then look, they just totally disappear into your work. So if you were using the fuzzy side for your final piece, you can't tell that I have lots of tails hiding in here because I've cut them and trimmed them all down to be the same size as the loops. So that's one thing. All right. And then I still have my punch needle threaded with white. So I'm going to go to one of the other spaces. So this is always how you start. You have a little bit of a tail. I'm going to leave a little less of a tail this time. I'm going to go through and punch, grab it, pull the tail out, and then I'm going to drag and go down, pull up, drag and go down, going around that circle, kind of staying pretty tight with my stitches, just dragging a little bit further each time and doing a couple of stitches inside. So there's another question in the chat that says, every time I pull out, the yarn comes out. So the yarn is not staying in the monk's cloth. So the first question I would always ask is it really monk's cloth? Because if it's the wrong kind of cloth, it's not going to grab your loops and the stitches are going to come out each time. The other trick, as Sandy even noticed in the chat, is that if you have this yarn too tight, you're working against yourself. And if this yarn is caught on something, or if this yarn is pulling on something, it's actually pulling your stitches out. It's not letting them go through. So check and make sure that you have plenty of yarn coming out the back of your punch needle and that it's not working against you. So you also need to finish on the bad side and pull your white yarn away from the tool and then cut in order to free up your yarn. So there's another question that says, I have the right cloth, but it's not pulling through. So yes, check and make sure that when you thread it, your needle, that you did go through this hole, because if your yarn just comes out of the needle and doesn't go through the hole, that's another reason why stitches can come out. So thank you for reminding us that might be part of the problem. We'll see. Then I'm going to take this extra tail and I'm going to cut it down. And I'm going to keep doing this in order to fill in a couple more of these white dots before we kind of move on. Can you repeat the ending? Absolutely. All right. So I have my beginning. You stitch through, you grab the tail, and you keep it on this side where all my loops are gathering. I'm going to pull up. And when I pull up, the opening is kind of pointing in the direction my stitches are about to go. So it's kind of like the front, and it's like a pencil, and it's showing me which direction I want to write with the thread or with this yarn. And I'm going to outline that half circle, and then I'm going to do a couple of stitches inside. And if you see some more of that monk's cloth poking out, you can always stitch over top of stitches that you already have and add a couple more loops in. If you are trying to use the loop side as your finished side, then you might want to check also and make sure that you're having coverage on the other side too, and that your loops are close enough to provide a really fluffy, nice kind of feeling. So I'm doing a couple more stitches over top of each other to make sure that I have plenty of stitches stuck in here. And here's how you finish. I pull the yarn away from the needle. I pull the needle out of my work, and then I cut the loop I'm holding and cut the tail down. And that's how you finish each time. So from all the stabbing, the fabric tends to get loose. So yes, just keep stretching it. You can try to use a little bit of masking tape or something if you want to, but for the most part, you do just need to keep stretching it. Also make sure that this little metal piece is twisted as tightly as you can get it to try and help some of that stabbing. Also, when you are doing your stabbing, if you're stabbing and getting too much resistance, kind of use the tip of your needle and be a little bit more strategic about pushing it through one of the in-between squares, not directly through threads, which is going to kind of cause, when you hear that like kind of sound, it means you're trying to go through threads instead of going through some of what would be the openings. So yeah. All right. So the question also is, if we're planning to make a small rug, we also use monk's cloth, and that is a great question. It might be discontinued at this point, but Michael's had this really, it might be in the store still, I'm not sure. But we have this tufting cloth. Tufting and punch needle are the same thing, except punch needle is done by hand with a needle, and tufting is usually done with something called a tufting gun. And so if you've seen those things on Instagram where like where yarn is coming out of these machines and making these really elaborate rugs, that is the same thing. And we could do one of those rugs by hand. It would just take a little bit longer. But a machine using tufting cloth would be able to get you a rug faster. And then there is a backing cloth that we usually put on those rugs too. So this stuff is pretty amazing. I love it. And so, yeah, if you want to up your game and make rugs instead of what I would call a mug rug or a coaster, then you can up your game with pillows, or you can up your game with rugs and other things like that. All right. So also, yes, someone's saying that keeping your punching straight up and down and not to the side is also going to help you make sure that your stitches stay in. So yes to all of that. I'm going to keep going and make these last white bits before I switch colors to my red. So these are great questions. We're having really good interaction in the chat. So thank you for helping each other. And all of that is great. So will I be doing a class on tufting? I don't know. It's possible if you're interested. So I'm punching through these circles and filling in that space with my white yarn. Now, obviously, each time I stop a circle, I'm not pulling over to go to the next circle, because I think you can imagine that I would leave a string going from spot to spot, and it's going to be hard to cover up that string. So that's why each one of these little sections I do individually and don't try and do them all in one swing. So I'm cutting the tail and I'm cutting the loop. Also with the tufting machines, what happens to make the rugs is the tufting machines make these loops, and the loops are a little bit longer in a tufting machine, and then a tufting machine cuts. So you might have seen some of those really satisfying videos where people take like a razor and kind of cut open all those loops. So you could do that with your punch needle. You could by hand or using a razor these down, and then you can have this side be your finished side. So that is a choice too. Someone's asking, can we use a fusible interfacing on the back when we finish? Yes, great idea. So I may have missed this, but can you use a tufting machine material? Can be used with punch needle? Yes. So that big long cloth that I had for my tufting machine is monk's cloth. And so I can use that in the same project. So both of those are interchangeable. And thank you, Clover. That's very sweet of you. All right, I'm grabbing my yarn and I am filling in these last two circles on this, and then I'll show you switching my red, and just a couple of tips about switching colors and making sure when you go up next to each color that you don't interfere with the work that you've already done. And pulling this. And the tail. One more. And again, keep making sure that your yarn has plenty of working space and that this isn't too tight, because too tight is going to pull out your stitches. I'm going to pull my yarn through the end to make my tail a little bit shorter, so that when I do my first stitch, there's not as much to have to grab and there's not as much excess over here. And a couple stitches around this. So if you need a lot of resistance, you might be going in between threads instead of in between sections. And you can kind of just find a better place to poke down. You'll notice I'm turning my work around a lot, and that's to keep the opening of the punch needle going in kind of the same direction I want it to go. All right. Now we're ready to move on to our red. So I'm going to rethread my punch needle with red. I think the color I'm using is called Claret. I really like it. It's a really beautiful red. So how do you get the loops on the back so small and consistent? The length of your punch needle is what's determining your loops. So there are longer punch needles that are going to leave loops that are even longer and floppier on the back. And there are shorter punch needles that are going to leave smaller loops on the back. So the way that I'm trying to keep my loops as nice and even is by keeping my stitches nice and even. So I'm trying to keep my stitches going in the similar direction, and I'm trying to keep my stitches nice and even. So here comes my threading. If you haven't seen this yet, I'm going to go ahead and put this needle through. There's the double wire coming out the end. I'm putting this time my red yarn through the double wire, pulling it through, and there we go. Don't forget this part. Make sure that it goes through this last loop, and make sure that the loop is going down towards the table and towards the bottom of the punch needle and not up towards you. That might be another reason, if your stitches are falling out, that you may have improperly threaded your punch needle. Get yourself some yarn so that it's got some space to breathe and it's not going to pull out your stitches. And now we're going to do the red. So for the red mushroom, I'm going to start about right here, and I'm going to outline the red, and then I'm going to start working around some of those white spots. So the most important part when you're doing your next color is to make sure that you don't stitch over top of a color that you already have, because you are going to not be able to get that red back out once you cross over a stitch. I pulled my red tail, leaving that tail on this side, and on the other side, keeping that opening and moving in that direction. So you can tell that my stitches, I'm just barely pulling up. Don't pull too far away, because if you pull too far away, you're going to pull your stitches out. If you do start to pull your stitches out by accident, I'm pulling the yarn through the back of my punch needle to get it as close to the fabric as I can again. And also, when it comes to someone talking about the stabbing motion and making your fabric a little looser, I do kind of keep my fingers on this side to kind of push up the fabric towards my needle. Obviously, don't put your fingers underneath the needle, because even though it's not super sharp, it will hurt. But I have my two fingers basically right here underneath. That's kind of keeping that taut right next to where I'm stitching, so that it kind of keeps that fabric pushed up and helping me to move through the fabric without moving the fabric around my hoop too much. So the person who was saying that they were having a hard time keeping their fabric straight, those fingers underneath might help also. I missed that part about, do you need different length needles? Gold needles, lock in the size. Yes. So there are different needles that you can, the needle itself can do several different loop sizes. So that is a different kind of needle and that is available. So maybe sometimes you want to do some detail and then sometimes you want to do just some filler stitches. You can do different lengths of stitches. Absolutely. So when I'm going around this white, I don't want to go through the white. I want to go around it. So I'm going next to it, but I'm not going into the pile of white. And on the back, you can tell too that I'm not going into the pile of white circles. I'm going around it. If you go through the middle of it, it is going to mess it up. All right. Someone said that if you accidentally stab yourself or using a red yarn, so it's fine. That's hilarious. And you're my kind of crafter. That's really funny. All right. And I'm going to stitch. So I am using those fingers to kind of push the fabric up, which I think is going to help everybody kind of keep their fabric from getting too loose too quickly. It will get loose. That's kind of just normal. But to keep it from getting too loose too quickly, I am kind of keeping those fingers, sorry, right on the side of where I'm poking in to kind of keep that fabric a little bit tighter. See, it's so funny because I don't even know I'm doing some of these things until you guys ask these questions. And then I'm able to kind of explain why I'm doing some of the things I'm doing. Going around this white. And you can go as close to it as you want to, but you just don't want to go into the patch. And then I usually keep going around with my stitches. If I wanted to, I could make all the stitches horizontal or vertical and make them all line by line, but I tend to kind of want my stitches to have a circular path. And as you can see on my final project, if I would have stitched all my yellow going down each time, that would be a much different feel from the yellow going around. So the way you do your stitches does kind of change your design. So it is completely up to you. These are a lot more almost lined up, you can tell, because I kind of wanted that mushroom to have like that texture. So you can think about how you want to do yours, but I tend to kind of outline and continue to work in is what I usually do. And I don't think we're going to be able to finish our entire project today, but I will talk about how to finish the project and some of the things you can do with these punch needle projects once they're done, besides admire them and say they are beautiful, which they are. It's the most therapeutic craft, I am telling you. You're going through some things, punch needle is your friend because there's a really good feeling to stabbing this needle through this fabric over and over again and creating something beautiful. So I'm a big fan of punch needle. It's a craft that's been around forever, but it's kind of been making its comeback lately, especially with so many different rug artists. Ooh, there are some really great, talented people online who've been creating all sorts of beautiful, beautiful tufting rugs. Try not to stab yourself. That makes it a little more stressful, but yeah. And then if anyone's interested, next week I have 2 different classes coming up. And one of my classes on Friday is celebrating something that you may or may not know about called Pi Day. So I used to be a middle school and high school math teacher. And so Pi Day was like the best day in math teaching world because, I mean, when can you actually celebrate math? Never. It's not usually something you party about. So we would throw some pretty incredible Pi Day parties, and I'm throwing a Pi Day party next Friday online. You're invited. I'm going to teach you how to do some string art. So I'm going to use a little bit of math and use a little bit of embroidery floss and embroidery needles and show you how you can make lots of different string art designs. So join me on Friday, March 14th, 3.14 for Pi Day. And I know we'll have a good time with that. We also did, I do a lot of different classes on Thursdays and Fridays. And one of our classes last weekend was granny squares. So if you are interested in kind of getting into crochet. I did a really nice beginner granny square class last week on Friday, and that video is available on YouTube. Comes with lots of handouts. I want to try and make it as easy for you as possible. And also next week, thank you, Jennifer, for reminding me, is wood burning. So wood burning is a really fun hobby. It's an easy entry point because the wood burning tool is only about $15. And then once you have that wood burning tool, you can do so many different things with it. So the wood burning class will be kind of a beginner friendly class too, where I show you how to use your wood burning tool. We're going to be burning some Easter eggs, some wooden Easter eggs, because as we all know, eggs are expensive. So let's use some wooden eggs this year and let's do that. So my Granny Square class is on the Michaels YouTube page. I think Martina has that link and she might be able to post that for you in the chat. But yeah, so if you have yarn, if you've bought yarn for punch needle, go ahead and use that same yarn for crochet. Teach yourself something new. And I'd be happy to see you again in some more classes on Thursdays and Fridays. Keep track of our classes on the Michaels Instagram, which is Learn with Michaels. Or if you want to follow me personally, my personal Instagram is the number 4M Coleman. And I usually put all kinds of pictures of all the different classes I've been working on and some of the upcoming things that I've been testing out to see if I can make some classes about those things. So a bunch of different small designs and small squares and sewed them together. Oh, well, what a great idea. And you can use embroidery thread to punch needle. Yes, but you have to have a much smaller needle for sure. Is there a remedial class for slow learners? Yes, the remedial class is going to be that video because then you have the access to be able to slow down and to be able to rewind and double check some of the different things that I'm doing. So that will be available on the YouTube channel on Monday. No problem. We're just glad you're here. So thank you for trying. You should congratulate yourself for trying new things. Stick with it. The first time I tried punch needle, I was like, how is this working? This is like magic. How do I stab something through and it magically makes a stitch? That's crazy. But what it did was it's that monk's cloth is grabbing all those loops and keeping those loops over here. It's pretty amazing. I'm not going to lie. Whoever came up with this is a genius. I'm also curious if the monk's cloth, if like monks actually came up with monk's cloth or if their outfits were at one point made in monk's cloth. So I got some research to do about monk's cloth because I don't know that much about it. Just that it's magic and I love it. Thanks, Jennifer. Jennifer's talking about some of my miniature classes. There's a miniature class coming up for spring where we have moss and miniatures. So miniatures are super, super popular right now. So you can picture fairy gardens with the little miniatures, but we have even more miniatures at Michael's that are very specific and very fun. So I'm going to be putting some of those together to make some cool spring designs, tabletop designs, something to put as a centerpiece at your Easter table or really just any day. And I'm done with the red cap of my mushroom. So I am going to pull this and I'm pulling my needle away. I'm cutting and I am trimming. And now I have this lovely little mushroom cap that is finished. And on this side, I have all the nice stitches. Now I'm going to keep going with this. I'm not going to keep going with this in class today. So if you have some last minute questions, now's a good time to ask some of those because I'm just about going to be wrapping up. But what I would do next on my punch needle is I would go through and do the white stem. I would obviously do the smaller mushroom too. And then I would go through with my yellow and decide how big I want my circle to be. So you can trace the circle around to know how big, or you can go all the way to the edge of your hoop and that'll keep it a nice circle as well. Once you have your finished work, and I've decided that the stitches side is going to be my side coming up, then I can take my work out. You can leave it in the hoop. And I think we talked about this in one of my embroidery classes. You can use a little trim or something and actually pull this backwards and hide this. You can hot glue it to the back. And when you hide this and hot glue it to the back, that also secures these stitches. So anytime you have glue touching these loops, it's going to keep those loops from easily pulling back out. I haven't had any trouble when it comes to something like a wall hanging of I don't touch a wall hanging, so the stitches don't magically come out unless you mess with them too much. So you don't need to do an adhesive unless you think it's going to get a lot of use. So if I take this out of my hoop, and if I wanted to finish this up in order to make something like a coaster, I could take a piece of cardboard and I would use hot glue. And when I use my hot glue, I'm going to cut some slits around the circle. And these slits are going to help be able to pull these pieces up and keep a nice round edge on it. So I'm cutting these slits in order to give it enough movement so that I can keep overlapping the fabric. I can either directly put it onto these loops, and then by hot gluing this directly onto the loops, it's going to keep all those stitches nice and tight. I could also, like I did on the rainbow one I've been showing you, you can attach it to cardboard, and then I can put a felt piece over top of that too in order to make it a little bit more sturdy. Something else is if you have something like this cute little fox, you can attach felt to the back of this cute little fox. You can use some fusible interfacing. And someone was just saying again, a fusible patch would work perfectly. So picture yourself putting felt on the back of this guy, and then you can hang them on a little keychain. You can make it a patch. You can sew this patch onto a backpack or onto a jacket or something cute like that too. So once you have a really cute design like this, you can cut this design down. Obviously, be careful when you're cutting so close, and leave a little bit of fabric to kind of do what I'm doing to have some sort of backing in order to keep it attached. Notice how if I don't cut the slits, how bulky this becomes and how you're going to get some weird dart points and things like that. So the point of me cutting these slits is to make the fabric a little bit more flexible and more willing to go in the round, which is what we need in order to finish this particular design, since it is round. So I would keep cutting all of these and I would hot glue those down. And then if you want to put another piece of felt or something to cover up all of this part and have a really nice backing, I think that's a great idea. There's a question that says, can we redo a place where we did the stitches? So I think you're asking, and maybe you can ask this question again so I can make sure I answer it. But if you mean redo, like, can you go back to a spot and add in more stitches? The answer is yes, absolutely. If a stitch comes out, you can, okay, good. You can cut it down, and you can cut that down on the side where all of your other trimmings have happened, and then go back in with that same color and add some more loops. So you can do it that way too. So the material that the fox is on comes in this packet. So there's like a narwhal, there's a bee, there's some other things. It is monk's cloth, it's just super, super tiny. So that's why you're able to use embroidery floss, because all the little spaces are so tiny and it can grab the embroidery floss. If you try to put embroidery floss through this, it would just come right back up because the weave is too loose on this for the teeny tiny embroidery floss. Great questions, great questions. Another idea, like I've mentioned before, is if you decide to go larger. I think this is an 8x8 square. There are even larger squares than this. So you can punch needle to your heart's content. And then this fabric is really friendly to go through a sewing machine. And so then I would just put a backing fabric behind this and a pillow form, and you can sew those together, turn it inside out, and then right sides to right sides, and then flip it inside out for your finished pillow. So another question says, how can we decide which cloth thickness we use with the yarn size? I would say that all the monk's cloth that's currently being sold at Michael's is this, the monk's cloth that comes by itself is the thickness for this Impeccable yarn, which is a number 4 waisted yarn. But if you buy the different kits come with the appropriate monk's cloth And then there's a smaller needle in the same place where you would find this large wooden punch needle at Michael's. There is a smaller, it's like a purple, teeny tiny needle, almost looks like a ballpoint pen. And that's what you're going to use for something smaller like this. So they do always recommend on the back, if it doesn't come with a needle, it does recommend what size needle you should use on each one of those kits. So it looks like we are wrapping up. We've got a lot of great questions. We have a lot of great answers. And I think that we are just about done for the day. So Martina, if you don't mind switching me back over. Thank you everybody for coming. I had so much fun. I hope you did too. I would love to see your finished projects. So feel free to tag me at 4M Coleman, the number 4M Coleman, or at the Learn with Michaels Instagram, or both. And if you are able to show one of your pieces, we would love to share it with everybody on Instagram. So please feel free to show off some of your beautiful punch needle work. And I hope that you continue to take some more of these classes, and I hope to see you again soon. Bye, everyone. See ya. Thanks for coming.